All right, let's talk about one of the most critical parts of professional investing, managing risk. Because in a world of unpredictable markets, protecting what you have is every bit as important as growing it. And today, we're going to break down one of the most powerful tools in that defensive playbook, hedging.
So let's just start with the big question right up front. When the market gets choppy, how do the pros protect themselves from getting wiped out? I'll give you a hint. It's not about predicting the future. It's about strategy. It's about having a solid defense. And the answer to that question is the hedge. Now, at its core, a hedge is just a move you make to offset potential losses. You're basically taking an opposite position in something related to your main investment. The best way to think about it? It's an insurance policy for your portfolio. You pay a little bit now to protect yourself from a potential disaster down the road. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this consultant style. First, we're going to get a really solid handle on what hedging actually is. Then, we'll open up the toolkit and see the main ways the pros actually do it. After that, we have to talk about the cost, the price of that protection. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with why this concept is so important for every investor to understand. All right, part one. What is investment hedging? Before we get into the fancy tools, we have to understand the fundamental idea here, and maybe more importantly, what hedging is not. And this is a really, really critical point. The whole goal of hedging is not to eliminate risk entirely. That's a myth. It's about reducing it, about softening the blow if things go south. A perfect hedge that makes you totally invincible, that's something you find in a textbook, not in the real world. It's all about risk management, not risk elimination. And that brings us to the big trade-off. See, there's no such thing as a free lunch in investing. That protection, that insurance policy we talked about, it costs something. And as this quote gets at, by protecting yourself from the downside, you almost always have to give up some of your potential upside. That is the fundamental bargain at the heart of every single hedge. Let's make this idea really concrete with that insurance analogy. Okay, imagine you've got a house in an area that sometimes floods. Now, you can't build a giant wall to stop the flood. That's the market risk. It's out of your control. But what you can do is buy flood insurance. You pay that premium every month. Now, if the flood never comes, sure, you're out the cost of the premiums. But if that flood does come, you are saved from financial ruin. That is exactly how a hedge is supposed to work. Okay, section 2. Now that we understand the why, let's get into the how. It's time to open up the professional's toolkit and look at the two main ways they actually build a hedge. So the two main approaches are hedging with something called derivatives and hedging through good old-fashioned diversification. You can think of derivatives as the precision tools, kind of like a surgeon's scalpel for risk. Diversification, on the other hand, is a broader strategy that tons of people use, sometimes without even realizing they're hedging. Let's break them both down. So first, what in the world are derivatives? Don't let the name scare you. They're just financial contracts that get their value from something else, an underlying asset. That could be a stock, a commodity like oil, or a whole index. Their price is directly tied to that other thing, which makes them super effective for hedging, because you can get a position that's designed to move in the exact opposite direction of your main investment. Theory is one thing, but to really see how this works, we need a case study. So let's meet an investor. We'll call him Morty, and Morty is going to use one of the most common derivatives out there, a put option, to protect his investment. Okay, here's the play-by-play. First, Morty makes his investment. He buys 100 shares of PLC stock at $10 a share, so he's in for $1,000. He feels good about it, but he's also smart, a little cautious. So, step 2, he buys his insurance policy. It's a single put option, and it costs him $100. And what does he get for that $100? Well, step 3. He gets the right, not the obligation, but the right to sell his 100 shares for a guaranteed price of $8 a share anytime in the next year. That's his floor. That's his safety net. Now, let's see how this plays out. This is where it gets interesting. His total initial cost, remember, is $1,100, the stock plus the option. Okay, scenario 1. The stock soars to $12. Awesome. Morty sells his shares for $1,200. The option he bought, it expires worthless. He didn't need the insurance. So after his initial cost, he walks away with a nice $100 profit. But now look at scenario 2. Disaster strikes, the company goes bankrupt, the stock goes to zero. Without the hedge, Morty would have lost his entire $1,000. But he has that put option. He exercises his right to sell his shares for $8 each, getting $800 back. His total loss is capped at just $300. That is the power of a hedge. It turned a catastrophic loss into a manageable one. So Morty used a really precise tool. But that's not the only way to do this. Let's look at another investor, Rachel. She uses a totally different strategy, one that's a lot more common for everyday folks, using diversification as her hedge. Okay, so Rachel's main investment is in a company that sells luxury goods. Her thinking is when the economy is booming, people will have extra cash and buy fancy stuff. But she's worried about a recession. So what's her hedge? She also buys stock in things like utility company. These are businesses that tend to do okay even when the economy is bad, because, well, people always need to keep the lights on. The logic here is pretty simple, right? She has two investments that are designed to do well in opposite conditions. They create a natural balance in her portfolio. And this brings us to a really crucial part of our analysis, Section 3, the price of protection. We've seen how powerful hedging can be, but it's not magic, and it's definitely not free. Any good consultant has to weigh the costs, so let's do that right now. Let's go back to Morty's good scenario for a second. The stock went up, he made money. But that hedge had a very clear cost, and we can isolate it right here. That $100 he paid for the option, it's just gone. If he hadn't bought the hedge, his profit would have been $200. With it, it was only $100. That $100 difference, that's the real, tangible price he paid for peace of mind. So let's just recap these downsides. First, you've got the direct costs. That's the premium Morty paid for his option. Second, you have the opportunity cost, which is just a fancy way of saying you make less profit if you're right. And third, and this is a big one for strategies like Rachel's, is the risk of imperfect protection. There's just no guarantee that your two investments will always move in opposite directions. In a real market meltdown like in 2008, sometimes everything goes down at once. All right, we've looked at the tools and we've looked at the trade-offs. That brings us to our final section. Why does any of this matter? What's the takeaway for the everyday investor? Okay, let's be really clear about something. The kind of complex hedging that Morty did with derivatives, that's mostly the world of professional traders, big banks, and huge investment funds. Most people saving for retirement are not, and probably should not be, messing around with options contracts. But, and this is a big but, even if you never buy a single derivative in your life, you need to understand this stuff. Why? Well, for one, it helps you understand what the big market players are doing. It also helps you make sense of the financial news. But most importantly, that core idea behind Rachel's strategy, managing your risk by being smartly diversified, that is a powerful concept that absolutely everyone can and should use. So, if you're going to take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. Hedging is a defensive tool. It's about managing risk. It's about protecting your capital so you can survive the downturns and live to fight another day. It is not a magic wand to create huge profits. It's about staying in the game. And that really brings us to the final thought. You now have the mental model that the pros use to think about risk. You know the tools, you know the costs, and you know the trade-offs. So the only question left is, now that you know all this, how will you look at your own investments? Are you thinking about both offense and defense?